Hello, folks. I have brought all of these smaller flower pictures up to the same level with the Imprimatura and with the white highlights painted back over. What I'm doing now is going back in with a complementary color to each of the elements, in this case the flowers themselves. When I'm doing the complementary color or the local color, it could be one of three things that I'm going to do there, and that's, or one of the three things that a person, one, could do there, and that is a complementary color to the final color, a contrasting color. So for example, for a red object, you could paint green. For a yellow object, you could paint purple, and so on. I'm going with complementary colors for this. More of a local color, so that's the third option. Complementary, contrasting, or a real local color. The local color would be if the object is red, then you give it a red local color, and then that's going to shift with warmer lights, cooler shadows, reflected lights, and these types of things. It's gonna be altered one way or the other. And in this case, it's going to be details, highlights, reflected light from other elements in the picture. This is a little bit more abstracted in the composition, but if this was the flower itself in its local environment or its natural environment, surrounded by leaves, things like that, then it would be getting a lot of reflected green light from the leaves. It'd be getting blue light from the atmosphere from above. It would be getting warmer light from the sun, and it would be getting cooler shadows because of the atmospheric blue from the sky, unless it's a gray day, in which case the highlights would be less warm, the shadows would be less cool, and it'd be a little bit more neutralized. In which case, more of a straight local color or a contrast color would probably be the best idea. All three work in pretty much any condition. It's going to be affected by its environment. It's going to be affected by light source. So, this is a Pfingstrosen. It's a type of rose here in Germany. And what I'm going to do is go for the deepest shadows, because I feel like most of what I'm going to paint, if I have those deepest shadows in, then it's going to take care of a lot of the work for me. And then I'll come back in with details, highlight. This area is going to be a little bit whiter. The fringes of the petals in the middle area are going to be the same as the deep shadows. And so it's going to cover a lot of that stuff by itself. And my job will be made a little bit easier as far as bringing in highlights and sort of the whiter, less chromatic areas away from the fringes of the petals. This area here, this flower here, it's from a tree. It's a tree branch with flowers. These are a little bit more purple. in nature. I'm probably going to try to stick with the same kind of red pinkish color that I'm going to use for the flowers also here. And then it'll have more nuances of lavender and purple when I'm painting the final pass in oil paint. These are a little bit more orangish pink, or orange and pink. I decided to kind of do a mix of those two things, the orange and the pink. I could also, theoretically, I could also go blue with all of this stuff, use that as a complementary base layer that everything I painted on top would kind of have in the shadows and underneath the oil layers. It gives it a more rich, vibrant sort of a feel. But like I said, in this case, because of the deepest shadows, that's basically what I'm concentrating on now. And so, yeah, whenever we're doing these things, we have to think about it, make decisions about what's going to give the best end result. And especially because of the broad areas of white that are going to be quite cool, that reddish pink is going to actually show through that and provide that complementary richness. Same as with this. And I've already done 3 of these. I'll show those in a minute. Or actually, I could show them now. Maybe that makes the most sense, huh? And this is maybe a good example of what I'm talking about. So for this one here, I went with the local color, or maybe actually more complementary. These flowers at the end are a little bit pinkish. They're warm, orangish, maybe cream color, white. And so all of those colors are going to lay on top. And this reddish color will shine through from underneath and fill in some of those deeper shadow areas. The background is still a little bit darker than I want. Once I start with oil, I'll probably try to push that back a little bit more with lighter color. I'm not 100% sure yet. I figure I'll start with the roses and kind of see how the background feels in comparison. With this one, I decided to go for, at the end, these are going to be a very warm white. They're white flowers with very warm light. And so this blue is going to help with the richness of the whites. Once you get a little bit of that warm white on top of this, then it's going to be very easy to make those form curves, fading from the light to the softer, the highlight to the softer lid areas and into the shadows. This blue will really hold in the shadows. So the contrast color. And this is more local color. And so basically we have one of each. Strict local color. The purple that I want is going to be much more vibrant than this, but this is sort of a good grayed out example of local color. This is going to be local. These flowers are not going to change all that much from this basic color. So local. contrasting, and complementary. And complementary just means that the color that I'm laying down now is a complement of the color that it's going to be at the end. Complementary colors are usually 1 or 2 steps away from the final color on the color wheel. And so, because orange is made with red and yellow are therefore both complements of orange. And so that's how complementary colors work. If you have something that's red and you paint orange over it, then it's usually going to look pretty nice because those are complementary colors. Same with a sort of teal or turquoise, aqua blue. It's going to look good with green or with blue. And of course, when we're using any of these colors, we want to have a little bit of that color mix in the other elements. So there's a little bit of this turquoise blue here and there mixed in with the flower areas. And there's a little bit of this pinkish red color coming through from the Imprimatura in these areas here. And so it has that mix. It looks more natural when each area contains some of the color that it's laid next to. Then it looks like it belongs in the same environment. If it's just straight pink red, straight turquoise, flat colors straight out of the tube, direct on white canvas, then there's no cohesion, there's no relationship taking place. And building this up more atmospherically where the things start to mix together a little bit, and then in the later layers peaking to the final detail and final color, you have that underlying cohesion from this step of the process. And so, like I said with this one, with the one that's up on the easel now, we're going for a lighter background. The other 3 are so dark in the background, I wanted to do one that's actually lighter than the Imprimatura. And because there's orange, reddish pink, and purple, I decided to go with the purple in the background, even though it's going to be a very light sort of lavender purple, so that this gets set back a touch into that background. These things will pop off, and these things will also pop off a bit. And like I did before, I'm gonna make sure that those colors are pretty messy. I want there to be overlap. I want there to be cross-contamination. And that's where I'm at. That's what I'm doing right now. So let's try it out. And like usual, everything's an experiment. Part of why I like doing these smaller, quick studies and paintings is exactly that, to experiment with color combinations, experiment with the composition with the negative shapes and the positive shapes. So we're working, doing experiments with composition, doing experiments with color palette, color combinations, things like that. And if we can find a way to run through 20 quick experiments rather than laboring over one picture, we're gonna be able to try out a whole lot more combinations. I want to start with that background. So it's actually a little bit more blue and dark than what I want. I might have to kind of fudge this background part because the blue and the red that I have are not mixing all that wonderfully for a purple. So it's going to be a little bit of push and pull here. It's giving me a little bit of a silvery effect, which I kind of like. In fact, that tiny bit cooler is probably gonna win out, because this is gonna warm up quite a bit anyways with the highlights, and so I don't want to compete too much with that. And like I said, a little bit of cross contamination. Okay, that's way too blue. And like I said, I don't want to go too warm with that stuff. That's better. Okay. And this is, of course, just a ground layer. I will most likely be coming back over with this with some oil glazing before all is said and done. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I do want to lighten this up a touch. Cool it down just a touch. That's all right. Go ahead and start getting into this. I want to get some good color out of this, but I also want it to be thin enough to see all of my whites from underneath. So this is really just a straight glaze, or a glaze technique, a glaze approach to this. And the trick here, basically for me at least, is to get, I mixed a little bit of black in there, that's not good. It gets a little too gray. The trick with the glazing, a lot of times, not always, but a glaze like this anyways, one of the tricks is to get that as rich color as possible while also keeping enough of the detail from the whites. And the whites serve two purposes here. One is that we can start to almost use that for our highlights. Start to cut back into that stuff there. And you start getting, from the get-go, a little bit of nice highlight. I don't want to lose too much though, because this is where we need to start doing detail work. Second point of the whites is it gives us a roadmap to continue working up our details. We want to be able to see what we're dealing with. And one thing that's nice, as you can see, once these layers start building up, then you're getting start to get something called optic grays, where these colors, as they mix with the glazing, with the layers coming up, it starts to go gray, and they're toned grays, reddish gray, bluish gray, just not pure chroma colors. And as those optic grays start to build up, laid next to higher chroma, whether it's very light, very dark, whatever, it doesn't matter, then you start to get those nuances. You start to get that shimmering effect that you want from a painting. A little bit higher chroma. A little bit higher chroma here. And of course, real high chroma we can put back in with the oil. So it's definitely not our last opportunity to hit those high chroma areas. I'm starting to like that though. And like I said, a little bit messy. I don't mind it mixing in a little with the background. I don't like a little bit of, I don't mind a little bit of cross-contamination there. Now this next part's going to be a little bit stranger, because we're going to start going into a much more orange. And the reason I'm mixing on the canvas instead of beforehand is because I want that nuance. I want there to be some areas a little redder, some areas a little oranger, some areas a little yellower, and these local colors, or these complementary colors as the case might be. And so we're going for those nuances right away. I don't want to do all of that, mix every single tiny color on the palette. And again, this is just my technique. I know there's a lot of painters out there who are absolutely amazing, who will mix the colors first on the palette, and of course it can be argued that that makes a better painter too, as far as being a real direct impasto painter. That's key, is to be able to mix the colors on the palette. I'm not an impasto painter. Sometimes I think it's good to know how to do a lot of different techniques, because that's how, obviously, the more tools you have in your tool bag, then the better painter you're going to be, like with anything. And so some impasto painting, direct painting is essential for that skill set. It's just not the way that I usually paint. Now those are turning very yellow. And like I said before, this should have some nuances of oranges and reds and pinks and things like that in here. And I want to try to get some of those nuances now, so that it doesn't all have to be done with mixing each and every color and oil later. Of course, this bad boy back here is set back just a touch. Sort of continue in this chain. I want to have this chain of these yellow-orange flowers with this main one up here, and then the main focus will be the two pink flowers in the middle. And of course these are popping a lot more at the moment because of this contrast between the blue and the yellow. This is contrasting a whole lot less. And so we're gonna have to find a way with the final pass in oils to really pop these guys. So that's going to be a trick. I think probably what we'll do is focus on high contrast. High contrast here, and a little bit more neutralized contrast here. And we'll use that high contrast to make those the center point. You also have to be aware of what options you have available to get the effects that you want. And of course, these fantastic bright colors are one of the main ways to do that. And another option could have been that the string of flowers would have been the phoenix rose and around the edges and here, and then use these broader leafed roses in the middle. That would have been pretty good. That probably would have been the way to do it if we were going to depend on color contrast in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve here. But I just love these phoenix rose, and I think they're so cool. So I want that to be the center point, the main focus. And so that's what we're going to do. And one thing that's occurring to me here especially if this one at the top is the paint got a little bit too thick there. So I'm just watering it down just a touch so I can get that white stuff showing again. There we go. So my brilliante idea is that the blue is a complement, or is a contrast to the yellow, which is making the yellow pop. The contrasting color for red is green. Green is a complement of the yellow. So if the background is green rather than blue, then the yellow will be subdued and the red will pop. So we're going to put a little bit more yellow into that background, green it up a little bit. And see if that might be a solution. Although that looks pretty cool though. I don't know if this is the right... I don't know about this. I don't know. That's a whole lot of yellow. A whole lot of yellow. Although the green is definitely starting to do its job there. Not too terrible. I'm not sure. Tough call. Although moving out up into the corners and keeping that blue isn't bad. Seems like if it's isolated down into these areas, then it's not too terrible. It definitely blends in more, which is nice. I also don't want to give the feeling of leaves, because the whole point of this is to have those strings of flowers to become more of a design element. It's more about the design, about the composition, than it is about trying to recreate a naturalistic environment. And so I do not want this to read as sky and leaves. No siree, Bob. A little more of that silvery color in this area here, which I like. I don't want to lose, to be honest. And I want this whole thing to be a little lighter without obliterating it. So as these balances, pushing and pulling, searching, getting the stuff to meet all of the criteria that we have for it. And part of the criteria is how it relates to the other elements in the picture. Part of the criteria is that interplay between the layers of paint, the atmospherics, spatial composition, two-dimensional composition. And by spatial composition, I mean where these things exist in space. So the Pfingstrosen should be coming out. These yellow flowers should be a little bit further back. Purple should be quite a bit back. And obviously the background should be hazy enough to appear infinite. Like a sky, like, we're not talking about a bright blue sky, obviously, but a sky. The idea that there's not something behind, or that there's so many things behind that it creates its own atmosphere. And this is going to take highlights around the edges. So I want to be careful of going too light up in this area here, because that's how we're going to get that pop, is by keeping this background a little bit more neutral. But that's pretty much what I want right there. That's looking pretty good. These purple flowers, I'd rather just paint them in. Actually, I said before that I was going to do a little pink, right? So we'll warm this up just a touch. It's going to be more of a general impressionistic sort of warmth. Because we're dealing with these purple flowers, we're dealing with quite a bit of leaves. I don't know how far into the leaves I want to go, but definitely some indications of those purple flowers is probably good, or at least a little warmth to them. Now, a lot of the warmth that I'm going to get in the flowers and these Pfingstrosen, that's going to have to come from the oil. Most of the lighting effects are going to be taking place in the oil, in fact, on all of this. But I think that's a good stopping point, and I think it illustrates what I wanted to address today. So there we go. And once again, like I was mentioning at the beginning, there's 3 different ways to do, after the Imprimatura, there's 3 different ways to address the elements of the picture. One of them is with local color, which is what I've done here. The end result of these 2 flowers here are going to be about this color, this pinkish reddish color. The end result of these flowers is going to be this yellow, orange, sometimes reddish thing that we have happening right now. These are going to be purple, so this is actually more of a complementary, or more of a contrast color with this yellowish orange, but I want to make sure that they're getting a little bit of that warm light so they do stand off from the background a little bit more. But anyways, local color, one way to address the elements of the picture in glazing and building up layers. Second way is with complementary color, where at this stage of the picture, the color that we're painting in for the elements is on the color wheel next to the color that it's going to be at the end. So this local color is the color that is going to be at the end. Complementary color is a shade or one color off, or maybe 2 colors off from the color that it's going to be at the end. And contrasting color is opposite on the color wheel from the color that it's going to be at the end. And blue is not, ultimately these flowers will be white, like I mentioned, but a very warm yellowish orangish white, and that yellow orange is the complement to this blue. And how light or dark something is doesn't really affect the placement of the hue on the color wheel. It's going to be quite low chroma. It's going to be not a very vibrant yellow or orange like we have here. It's going to be more subdued, more grayed out with the white, but that doesn't affect the placement on the color wheel. And so what we're looking for with the contrasting is direct across the color wheel from the final local color. So there we go. A little lesson in underpainting with local color, complementary color, and contrasting color. Thank you very much.